Hello, I am Merril Gilbert. I am the co-founder and CEO of Trace Trust. I am the nationwide cannabis compliance and manufacturing agency, and I am also the host of the WEIC Inside Ops and Compliance Operations and Supply Chain Community. And I am really excited today for our talk with Kim Stuck. She is the founder and CEO of Allay Consulting, which she's going to tell you all about. But more importantly, we are also co-founders of another organization that is called the Cannabis Compliance Association. And we really are here to talk about why, when you are compliant and running your operation successfully, not only do you increase profitability, but you also decrease turnover. And so today's discussion is really about how compliance improves your operations through your people. And we are really thrilled to have a lot of conversation around this today. And I'm going to just let Kim introduce ourselves, and then we're going to get into some really interesting conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Merril. It's always fun to do something like this with you. My name is Kim Stuck, just like she said. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Allay Consulting. We're just a compliance consulting firm that helps the industry kind of navigate the different kinds of regulations, and help you make, safer products, be safer in your facilities for workers, that kind of thing. Mainly, operational compliance around FDA, OSHA, GMP certification, ISO certification, GACP certification, those kinds of things. So I'm happy to be here. And thank you, Merril, again for having me. It's always fun to hang out with you.
We do. We have a good time. And interestingly enough, when we met in one of our first conversations we ever had was the fact, aren't we competitors? We really shouldn't be talking. But we also said, no, more importantly, because of what we think so highly about what's possible with this industry, where it can go, and our backgrounds being very similar, we knew that we were much better when we collaborate and move the industry forward together, and that oftentimes we're not overstepping. We're often very much sharing and working through this. And so when I asked him to participate, I said, gee, what should we talk about? Because there's so many different things. And at the end of the day, we're like, oh, we could talk about SOP, standard operating procedures, and we could talk about GMP, why that's important. And everybody, does it all the time. But what we really got down to was in your daily life, and it doesn't matter if you're in cultivation, if you're a service provider, if you're a retailer, a distributor, a brand, anywhere along that, these requirements are so inbred. But if you don't really set up your team for success, if you don't really think through operationally, what is it that everybody needs to do? And because the industry is going so quickly, you're really in good shape if you have somebody there for 6 months. And if you don't have them for more than 6 months, or you've put all your eggs in one basket going, hey, Susie over there, she's it. Like, she is the only person that knows how to change the ink in the printer for our label. She's the only person that knows, like, that is not setting yourself up for the long run. It's not setting yourself up to grow and evolve over time. And it's also really, unfortunately, putting you at great risk throughout your entire company if there's a problem, if there's a disciplinary action, if there's any kind of legal ramifications for these things. So that's what we're here to talk about. So I'm going to just let you kind of give a little bit about what you thought when we came up with this idea, and then we can go into a more dialogue about questions.
Yeah, well, I think we've talked about, me and you hang out pretty often, so I feel like we've talked about this before, but I remember the first time I actually, GMP certification wasn't always available to the industry. Standards weren't written in the beginning when we first got involved. And when those standards became relevant and people, accredited certifying bodies and companies like yours, started saying, hey, this is our standard. This is what you should follow. people, obviously even right now, that's not required in all of the states. It's barely required to follow, regular food code rules for states when it comes to THC and hemp sometimes. So it's, really unregulated, if you will. So one of the weird side effects that I noticed, when the first company I got GMP certification for was kind of the cultural change within the company, and that people really started to have a pride in what they were making. And it was really cool to see. It was very like, oh my gosh, rewarding, if you will, because, we were doing trainings every month. All of the team would get together. They'd all have pizza. They kind of bonded. They talked about GMP. We'd explain what the new SOPs look like and all the things they need to follow. And it was very, very cool to see how people were like, oh, now I know exactly what is expected of me and what standard we have to be at. And our company is making safer products for everybody. And, you kind of got that change. At first, people were resistant, and finally they realized they weren't getting away with it. So they, they weren't going to be able to cut corners. So they kind of embraced it. And then it was almost like they were more happy at their job, and turnover went down by like 40% or something for this particular company. And it was like one of those, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that, because in this industry, turnover is crazy. People come and go. It's very incestuous. People, when they're in a position where they're treated poorly, or the working conditions aren't safe, or they're not heard, they don't feel heard or wanted, or they maybe have a very gray area of their job where they wear a lot of hats, but they don't actually really know what they're supposed to be doing and what their jobs are, spelled out for them. It puts people in a really hard place, and workers don't want to work in an environment like that. So putting standards such as GMP in place kind of builds that like structure of the way that the company should run. I feel like it was really interesting that it helped so many of those employees that maybe felt wishy-washy in the beginning of like, I don't even really know what I'm supposed to be doing, have a little pride and like realize, no, I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing because it's written in this SOP that I can read at any point. And now I know what I'm supposed to do, and I understand, and now I have pride in what I do. And it was just a really cool transition. So I think it was really a fun thing for us to kind of realize, and I think you had a very similar experience. And I just think that this is a really great topic to talk about because I don't think anybody's really talking about it that much.
Just in case you're not familiar with the term, but GMP stands for Good Manufacturing Practices. And what that means, on the simplest idea of it is that if something went wrong, you could find that product anywhere in the supply chain and bring it back, meaning from raw materials in the door to finished goods at the end. But it's all the processes that go along with that. And, I'm just curious in what you just said, because I found it so interesting. We talked a little about the employee effect, but what was it on the leadership? Where did they see the change? Did they see where this could be an opportunity? And then when you're meeting with leadership early on before they sign an agreement, what are some of those conversations for the outcomes that you talk through that they might not realize at the time, but they do see at the end of that process?
Yeah, well, and a lot of the things that I talk about to potential clients or people who are thinking about doing this on things like this is I try to talk about all of the things that it can do in the end. And I feel like the more and more certifications that we get for clients, our clients tell us what their outcomes are, right? So a lot of times I'm going, oh, really? You noticed this, and this? Great. Like I can, tell people that as well. Definitely the turnover is the big deal. I have learned over the years that if the changes that are being made in the company, because GMP certification is not something that happens overnight. It actually is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time and trainings and understanding. It has to come from the top down. If management and ownership is not on board, if it's just like a middle manager that's like, we need GMP certification, you kind of unravel almost because half of the people are trained or, there's a lot of miscommunication or they're not getting things done quick enough because the management or ownership is not on board or like doesn't really understand why it matters. So there is a lot of responsibility when it comes to the upper management, and employees. It's an absolute culture change of the entire company. And it's a good culture change. It's a great shift. We've seen, really good things happen because of it. But if people are not willing to take a look at that or not willing to listen to who is trying to implement these things, then we do run into issues and barriers in that instance as well. So yes, there is a huge change in management. Most of the time we are training our clients to understand GMP the same way that we do, right? We want them to be able to understand this. We don't just do the work for them and walk away. We like them to understand it just as well as we do. And that's always the goal, especially, if they have someone that's like the QA person, which is quality assurance, or, their compliance manager, or, operational manager, or all of them, right? A lot of times when we're doing audits, and I'm sure you have this too, we have 15 people following us around, with clipboards trying to write everything down. And that's just normal because people want to learn. They want to make sure that they're doing things right. There isn't a company that I know of that wants to make products that are harmful or, unsafe. Everybody wants their products to be safe. They want their consumers to be safe. And so it's kind of the natural way of things, right? And that's kind of the way that the industry is leaning. The same way that the industry in wholesale food manufacturing has leaned that way as well. So it's pretty normal evolution, I think. And I think that a lot of people are starting to really realize why these types of certifications, or at least being compliant with FDA GMPs and, OSHA stuff. It's a smart move, just because of risk mitigation in general, right? We don't want a recall. We don't want a press release about us. We don't want a bulletin. We don't, you want to be one of those good players that, your consumers can trust. And these are some really good ways to be able to do that. So yeah, it's great. It's pretty cool how it changes a lot in a facility.
This is us nerding out here.
Yeah, love it.
We get all excited. One of the things, because the industry is not only growing so quickly and more states are coming on, but we have other countries that are coming on. We have a variety of things happening. We're, expected any time now to get some real FDA guidance, at least on hemp derived products coming out. We are hoping around these things, but, oftentimes a lot of work that I do is with, a lot of startups, not just in my cannabis world, but in my food and beverage world as well. And we start so often in not only what are you trying to create, but it's so much about who the team is, right? Who's going to be doing what? And often, and even with the HR departments, right? Because they're definitely doing a lot of the, job descriptions. They're doing a lot of the postings for jobs. They are obviously doing all of the, onboarding and paperwork and everything else. But what happens too is on the licensing side. So again, doesn't matter which phase, anywhere that's required licensing to participate, you have these things around what we call these standard operating procedures, these SOPs. And we often see that it's just something on a list of things I need to have. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I download out of whatever software it's related to in my organization. But it doesn't actually correlate with those first three things we talked about: the job posting, the job description, and the actual job they're going to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It happens all the time.
So we just okay, well, we just brushed over that. And then then it goes back to what you said, right? Then why is there so much turnover? Why is this person unhappy? Why is the person that's been there, who's never been trained correctly, but just has adapted their own procedures, telling the new people what to do? And hey, we don't do it that way, right? And so that mass confusion ends up being a problem over and over again, which nobody ever can seem to put their finger on. Why isn't this working? Why are my people, and why am I losing people? But the other point of that was, in that early startup phase, is, because it's evolving, these things change, right? These are living documents. what somebody's doing today is not necessarily what they're going to do tomorrow. And one of the things that we talked about ahead of this conversation too was cross training, right? It's not just like, you've got to do this day in and day out. Not that that's not important, but how do we get that to the other side? Right?
Yeah.
What happens there? Talk about that a little bit.
Well, and that's, I think we've already talked about this. We do really intensive training with all of our clients, and it's required for GMP. You have to have internal training. You have to have onboarding training and annual training for all kinds of things, and obviously OSHA requires training every year as well. So setting up a really good training program is one of the best ways to cross-train, right? If everybody's in the same room, everybody's talking about the same things, there's consistency between what you're saying and what you're teaching people, then the thing that you talked about earlier, where Sheila only knows how to access our SOPs. She's the only one that knows how to update our SOPs. She's the only one. So if she leaves, nobody can access or update the SOPs. Are you kidding me? That is a nightmare. That is a logistical nightmare. And when you have a regulator come in and they go, hey, I need to see all your SOPs, and you can't get them, that's a huge violation. Especially if you're going for something, with the FDA, which eventually, they will be regulating, or, if your auditor for GMP shows up and they can't look at any of your documentation, that's a problem. So cross-training is a really great way to do it. Making sure that several people in the organization understand how the organization works. Also having what you were saying earlier, having a good hierarchy of who reports to who and who does what. I can't even tell you how many times I've asked people, like, well, who do you report to? Because in GMP, as you know, it's very important that the quality assurance person is not reporting to like a salesperson, right? Like a sales manager. They need to be reporting to the operations manager or something else, because there's a conflict of interest there almost, right? The salesperson's going to be like, we'll just tell everybody it's GMP, and nobody, like or whatever, because they're just trying to get more customers in the door, where the quality assurance person needs to be very focused on making this a safe product, making sure that every product comes out consistently, those kinds of things. And so you kind of have to really work it out so that people who shouldn't be reporting to other people, to get around that ethical dilemma, if you will, you have to make sure that happens. And also, who is in charge of who? When something goes wrong and I notice it as a packaging person and I'm on a line packaging and I notice, gosh, this concentrate looks a little reddish. What is that about? Who do I take that to and who do I tell, right? And that's something I ran into when I was a regulator. It was, one of the extractors was actually, this is just a story from back in the day, actually it was rusting on the inside. And so their extract that was coming out was, yes, it was so gross. It was so gross. But it looked like there was rust particles in it, and it was visibly different. They could tell that it was different. And when I was interviewing them, I said, well, you said that you saw this. What did you do with that information? And they were like, well, we didn't know who to tell. We didn't know who to go to. We didn't know what to fill out. Whereas, in a GMP practice that you would report that as a non-conformant, and you would, put that in a quarantine zone and then go to your higher up and figure out what the next steps are. Right. And instead that stuff got sold out the door and then had to be recalled and then disposed of. And it was, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product. And that was a really small company, and a few $100,000 is a lot of money for those small companies. And it was heartbreaking, but if they would have had something in place where I was like, hey, this looks weird. This isn't conforming with what we usually see. I need to record this. I need to figure this out. I need to do a corrective action plan. I need to da-da-da. And if everybody is trained to do that and you reward that kind of behavior of following these protocols, you're going to be rewarded tenfold, because it's going to save your company millions of dollars in the long run. And you can reward that person that caught it before it went out the door, and you won't have to go through a recall, and your brand doesn't get a black mark on it. It's crazy how risk mitigating these kinds of protocols are. I mean, it is unbelievable. They've been in place in different industries for hundreds of years because they work and they're effective. And the fact that people don't think that they need it is like baffling to me, because it's almost just like the nail in the coffin for your company if you're not thinking about these things. It's really important to do.
Yeah. What have you found with the founders, right? With the leadership and the management as they've gone through this, right? So where you started before, they might have signed on, and then what they felt after the experience was complete.
Yeah, well, every company is different. So some founders, some managers, some owners, they worked in other industries, maybe in other manufacturing facilities, making something that's not cannabis based. And so they understand GMP, and a lot of them understand the importance of it because they see the writing on the wall that it's going to be treated the same as every other industry eventually. And so these kinds of things are important. And then you have the other kind of side of the coin where maybe they don't come from another industry. They have no idea what GMP is. And they didn't even realize it was a thing to have, or what all the good things that you get from it are. And those are the ones that sometimes need a little help understanding. It's a lot of explaining, it's a lot of education, and it's a lot of, showing them, these are the things that can go wrong. And I've seen them firsthand. We need to make sure that you're protecting yourself, and you're protecting your company, and you're protecting your brand. And if we get buy-in from the higher level people, we see that the implementation of it in the facility goes a lot smoother. It's really rough when there's like one compliance person, like a compliance director, that's like, we need GMP, and the owners are like, I don't know, do we really need it? It's not required, and then there's like this internal battle the whole time. That's always very hard, and I'm sure you've seen that in other facilities. Which, when we were talking about cross training, we also make the owners and everybody come to those trainings as well. It is not just the lower level employees, it's everyone. Because when a GMP accredited certifier comes in and they go up, they interview everybody. Everybody in the freaking facility gets interviewed and they have to know what's going on when it comes to their quality management system. And so I think that they're kind of surprised by that. I think that they're a little like, whoa, we didn't realize how much work this was. And then they're pretty appreciative, because once it gets done and we can do, the social media shout out, and they can do a press release, and they get articles about them, and they, all these good things happen. And then not only that, but their products can cost more. They're potentially, they are safer products than every other product on the shelf. So they're less likely to go through recalls or hurt anybody, and, consumers can trust them. And then on top of that, if they have an exit strategy, nobody's going to buy a company that doesn't have risk mitigation and has a good quality assurance system, right? So having things like these certifications, like a GMP certification, is just helpful to a lot of the owners in different ways, right? So it's it kind of depends on the owner. It depends on the higher level managers, but the best results that I've seen are people where companies where the change is coming from the top down. And the owners are really on board and excited about it. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes it takes a little convincing, and then once they get it done, they're like, okay, this was worth it. This was awesome. But it's pretty rare that we have those. But when we have the owners really involved in the change, and they're being cross-trained themselves to understand what's going on, that's the best results that we find.
And I think I was mentioning to you that here, oftentimes what I see with, particularly when I'm working with startups in the investment side, it's pre-investment, during investment, and then it's actual launch of their business, and understanding this hierarchy, right? Who's going to be responsible for what, and why this cross training becomes so integral to the part of it. And you often tell, stories, the two sides of that story. One is the reporting relationship. And I want you to talk a little bit about that. And then what happens when there isn't, right? When there isn't a quality program in there, when there is no oversight internally, and how things fall through the cracks and the risks that you put yourself at.
Yeah. Well, this is something that we always say in our company, but if it wasn't reported, it didn't happen. Like nobody ever, regulators and auditors alike, and us consultants alike, we are trained to do investigations, right? We don't ask leading questions. We really ask questions that are a little confusing to people, that are open-ended, so that we actually get the real answer, or can at least like dial in what's actually going on in a facility. Same thing happens with any regulator who walks in the door. And because of this, we don't take anything at face value. I've been lied to so many times as a regulator that I don't believe anything anybody is saying. And I think it's a healthy distrust, because most of the time I'm right. And you're probably the exact same way. You can tell when people are BSing you. I mean, after so many years of doing it, you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but you're going to have to show me proof. And oh my gosh, when I was a regulator, there was this thing, and I'm sure you've heard of it. It exists, everywhere. But let's say there was a heavy metal or pesticide or something that was contaminating stuff. We would go in and be like, okay, we need all of your pesticide logs, we need all of your testing, we need all of this, we need all of this. And if we found that they weren't keeping any records, then in our minds, there's no proof that anything that they've made isn't contaminated. If they don't have proof, they don't have testing, they don't have pesticide logs that are filled out and say exactly what was used, they can't tell us where this contamination came from. We just assume that everything that they've ever made in their entire facility is contaminated. And therefore we do an any and all recall, and it's everything that you've ever made in the life of your company gets recalled. That is the company killer. Like that is when it's like, okay, documentation and records are the most important thing. And that's exactly what GMP is, right? And any quality assurance system, that's what it is. It's understanding, this is what we did. This is where, if there was something went wrong, we will know exactly where it went wrong, and we'll be able to fix it and do a corrective action plan and, record exactly what happened and know exactly which batches and where they went. So we can recall them, really quickly and efficiently and make sure that people are safe. So it's really interesting. I think that people don't really realize how important it is to keep that documentation and keep up on it, because the minute it's gone, everything is out the window. And really the regulator has all the power in that, and once that happens. And that's not what you want. You want to be able to say, no, look, this is proof. This is proof that I've been doing this every day. This is proof that we didn't use this pesticide. This is proof like it came from somewhere else. We need to figure out where that was, that kind of thing. And then, I also think that people don't realize that when things like this happen, that when you're putting the public in danger, jail time is a very real thing. The CEOs of that peanut butter factory that had the salmonella outbreak that they knew about and they didn't do anything about it, they're still in prison and they're going to be there for the rest of their lives. And when you are making a consumable product, you got to do stuff to mitigate that risk, because it's not just like your company, it's you individually as an owner that is at risk. And I think that shocks a lot of people, because people don't really realize that that's the way it is, and it absolutely is. So.
And, we also know that this, again, there's a lot of misunderstanding what that looks like, right? And just because you use a white labeler, which is somebody that is, making the gummies and the topicals and the tinctures and, and the pre-rolls for everybody and their brother, and slapping, your sticker on there, does not get you off the hook. Nor is it if it's your formula and you go to the co-packer and they're producing it because they're commercialized that for you. It's still your name on there. It's still your brand on there, and you are still the one that's responsible to make sure, even before that first production, that they can validate, they can produce this product to your specifications. These are, we're not lawyers, so we're not going to go into all the legal agreements that you need to have in here, but why they're so crucial. And when we talk about documentation, it's everything, right? So the beauty of today is there's great technology. There's the ERP system that helps you track all of your ingredients and all your production and everything else. But that's not your accounting system, right? That's a separate system. Or if, you are vertically integrated, not only is it tracking your grow and your extraction and your product and your distribution and into the retail set, all of those are different systems that need to somewhat talk to each other. But you can't just rely on this technology, and you cannot rely on one person to operate the technology. And so that team training is so crucial.
Yes, yeah, you cross-train. I mean, you've talked about it before. It's so important, and to know like how all these systems work. And it's everybody on the team. If everybody on the team understands how to use it, it helps so much, especially when people, leave or things change or things like that. Yeah, the white labeling thing has been a struggle for a lot of companies. Because you're exactly right. They're like, well, what if it's contaminated? Isn't that their fault? Aren't they the ones that go to jail and get in trouble? No, you're the brand owner. It's whatever label is on there. That's the label, right? If it's, whatever it is, that's what is on the recall. That is what is in the log, it's awful. And people are surprised by that a lot of times. I think we were just talking about it earlier where one of the biggest recalls I ever was a part of was because of a cross-contamination issue in a white labeler. And it was terrible. It was a terrible situation, but, we had like nine different, end product companies that had to go through a recall. And because logs weren't taken, it was all any and all type situation, anything made at that white labeler. And that was years of product, and it was just absolutely devastating to see that happen. And for me, from a public health standpoint, that's one of my biggest fears when people are like, oh, I'll just white label it. I'm like, you have no control over that facility, it's really hard to
and if that facility, before you even get involved with them, doesn't let you in and doesn't let you see everything and cannot demonstrate to you that they have all these systems in place, run as fast as you can. Don't even go there. Don't like, oh, I can't share my clients with you, because it's all like, no, sorry, that doesn't, cut it. We talk about training. We talk about, what's in a training program. And, at the end of the day, though, these job descriptions, these standard operating procedures that tells you what your job is, how can that also benefit you on the employee performance and unfortunately on the performance that's not up to par, right? When there is a disciplinary action, how have you seen that work well and benefit the company?
Oh yeah. Well, and just the same as I was talking about earlier, where each employee was like, hey, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do today. That's a good feeling to be like, okay, if I do this and I do it to this standard and up to this level, then I know that I am not going to lose my job because I'm doing my job to the fullest extent of what I'm supposed to be doing my job at. It kind of goes the other way from management down. It gives you metrics to be able to evaluate people's performances, right? If you don't have any like bar that you're measuring on, I noticed that this month every single day you put in the logbook this, and this. If 8 or 10 of them are missing or something, that there's something falling through the cracks and you need to, maybe have a chat with some people. If you're paying more, you have a bonus system we had a lot of people do that. It was hard for a couple of companies to get people on board. And so what they did was, hey, if this log is filled out for the rest of the month, we're going to give everybody a bonus, right? Or the people that were in charge of it. That's such a good way. We had them do pizza parties. We had them, really like trying to motivate, the gift certificates to, whatever you want to do. But, that it gives you a way to measure how people really are doing, and are they doing what I'm asking them to do, and are they making sure that my company is sound and making safe products. It's a really good way to kind of have that metric. I don't know, what's your what do you think? Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, it works really well. Here's the thing. one, it's never too late to start, right? So if you're not starting from, brand new business, brand new facility, whatever, you don't have to feel intimidated and say, oh, I can never do this, right? That's the beauty of the way that we work. We always say it's very customized and it's project based because we meet you where you are and try to get you where you want to be. And not sitting there going, oh, I can't believe you're doing this, right? So it's not about that as much as it is, the reality being that, when you are established and sometimes, people haven't had good practices and they've been kind of doing it their way for a while without a lot of oversight. How do you bring them along? Right. And ideally keep them, or even take that knowledge and elevate it. Right. So out of the process, they too can now take on more responsibility because they understand it better. But where that becomes so beneficial that we found is in, that ability, I don't know what happened, in the ability for them to really, gain information, right? So it's setting them up ahead, right? So talking to, again, the management and the leaders ahead of the start date, what to expect, identifying in their list who they think are going to be employees that are going to need a little bit more time to adjust, figuring out how to make sure that they get into the program from the beginning and like, this is going to be the reality from now on. This is how we're going to change. And then keeping them. And that's where those incentives help, right? If they see a bonus, they see a benefit, they see allocate, and understanding that, as managers, you have to go back, right? You can't tell somebody to go do a job and then never go back and see how they did it.
No. Yeah.
Providing that little bit of like, hey, this is great, but maybe you can just, adjust this. That little bit of connection makes all the difference. It means you didn't assign me something and never come back to check on me and then, call me out. We've all seen those postcards, right? I saw you doing something, out of the corner of my eye and that was wrong. And I made you, I disciplined you when I didn't even see that, the 120,000 times you've done it correctly.
Yes.
And it's out of context. So this is, the other reasons why these things work. And so, and it's that documentation. Again, if there is a problem with an employee, I talked to you this time. Here was the date of what we talked about and here's what we did. I came back and, here's the second time we talked about it and you had to sign for it. And this is the third time. And clearly, we've tried every which way to change it and we might have to, move on.
Right. Yeah. And just like you said, I mean, that's a liability issue too, right? You can't just let somebody go without the documentation saying why. Mm-hmm. I mean, and there's a huge ethical dilemma with that if you are just letting people go for no reason, So, yeah, I can't push that enough on how important documentation is in everything that you do in your facility. And, I'm just glad that we're on the same page with that. I mean, I feel like how can't you be, but so many people, that's hard for them to wrap their minds around because it does seem like a lot of work. But once you're used to doing it, it's just like no big deal. It just takes a little time to like get used to the way that it is. And just signing stuff every once in a while. I mean, it sounds kind of silly that that's important. But once you're used to doing it and it just is no big deal anymore. And then you can take that knowledge of, putting all this stuff in place. And if you open another facility, you can do the same things there, just
right.
Systems wherever you are, and it's just not a big deal. And changing the culture halfway through, if you've been around for 10 years, bad habits have been put in place, so that's sometimes a hard thing. But if you do expand, getting someone in there that can implement all this stuff from the beginning is always the best way to do it, I think, because then, people are learning new things. And all of this is implemented at the same time, and they just once they're used to it, and it's like no big deal. So.
And your positivity on a cultural change will spill over to everybody else. When you come and you explain why we're doing this, it's not to say we were doing it bad, right? It's not to say we're wrong. It's to say we want to improve. We want to compete at a higher level. We want to be able to give you raises and increases in benefits and all of these things. And we can't do it unless we're profitable. Right. And we certainly can't do it if we lose the business because of mistakes that we could have avoided.
Exactly. Yeah, it's protecting everybody's job. right? If a place goes out of business, that's a lot of people that are without work, and yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that as long as people are communicating well and explaining the why behind all of these changes, then yeah, you're going to have a winning team on your hands. And they're going to be happy with the changes. So it's just a matter, it just takes a little time and understanding and a little patience.
Yeah.
So,
so I know we're getting close to the end here, and I'm just, curious of how you'd like to finish out our conversation, remembering our audience here is in the three main areas: operations, whether it's, again, cultivating, retail, distribution, however it is, trucking, services, insurance, all of the risk areas. It is also the regulatory and compliance side and policy of future, and then supply chain, which, as I said, used to be this whole community used to sit separately. But we tied it all together because it's all interconnected. And particularly today, when we are facing so many challenges in the supply chain, in a lot of different areas, right? So from raw ingredients and packaging to now the cost of gas to move it from point A to point B. So what are your thoughts on where we could go from here, and what do you see on the horizon?
Yeah, well, I mean, times are tough right now when it does come to supply chain. But, if you've got a really good, like a vendor approval plan, if you know that you have backups for all of your ingredients and things like that, we talk about that all the time, I feel like, with everything. You're extracting chemicals, your packaging, you have different vendors that you can go through that are part of your like vendor approval program. And that you can rely on. Because a lot of times when people are putting in big orders, if they don't put them in fast enough, sometimes they take a lot longer to get somewhere, and you need to be able to account for that. Also, a lot of times they're just completely out of supply. So having a few different options for you to go to, I've learned that helps a lot of like, okay, well, if they don't have this, or I buy 100 from them and 100 of these from these people, but they're the same product essentially. That's always a good thing. Just keeping an open mind of like, okay, well, we're going to roll with the punches. This packaging didn't work. We need to work with something else. We need to figure something else and being able, and I think a lot of people in this industry are very used to, turning on a dime. Mm-hmm. So, thankfully we've seen a lot of people thrive during this time, even though things are really hard when it comes to that. I think that everything in this industry is interconnected. Everything you do from beginning to end, it's like a tight string, and if you pull or cut or, change it, it changes everything along the line. And so I think that the expansion that you just talked about is kind of, it sounds right to me. It sounds like that's a good decision to make because so many things are so intertwined. One thing goes wrong back here and it'll cause a chain reaction throughout the entire system. And you just have to be able to roll with the punches and help rely, on other businesses too, right? We're all in this together. Yes. Unfortunately, it's a rough time. But, if you can reach out to others that can help support you, or, be there for whatever reason, it's always really good to have, that I feel like the good ones will bind together and rise to the top and make it through these hard times. And putting things in place like what we were talking about that mitigates risk. I mean, that's just one less thing you have to worry about, right? In all of this. On top of all the instability and craziness, going for a recall or making somebody sick or, that's just more stuff that's going to be shoveled onto your plate as an owner or a manager. So I don't know. There's a lot going on. And I think the future is getting bigger. More and more states are coming online. FDA is hopefully going to come out with some regulations. Hopefully, FDA.
Yeah, we're waiting.
Right, for the CBD products, and I think that's going to really help them out to understand that there will be less in this gray area, a little more black and white. We're hoping, but we'll just see. I think that consumer safety is going to be like the number one thing that everybody's going to be focusing on and worried about. Probably from here on out in this industry, because that is a huge concern that a lot of people have. The fact that it's not really regulated in a lot of states. It's not really regulated in most states when it comes to health and safety. There's a lot of regulatory body pressure on how you put things on the package and things like that, but not so much, what is a safe product. And I know everyone's like, oh, but they make us test for everything. That's not enough.
And the consumer still doesn't know what any of this means, right? Again, for those of us that live in established states, we've now had years and years of seeing a variety of products and types of experiences, and for different needs and different times of day and different social cues. In a lot of these states, you're talking about people that haven't seen these products and they're just so excited to get their hands on it, but they're very much still living in a stoner culture and not in an everyday lifestyle culture. And don't even, and oftentimes our teams, which is this training process, is, don't know how to answer those questions. And it doesn't necessarily always translate into what other ways they're communicating their brand. And this is the conversation that we're having. And so, for, the WEIC group, for this particular, Inside Ops, this is why these conversations are crucial. One is because, we want to see more women employed in cannabis. We want to see them have career paths. And we also want to, make sure that we are building an industry like all others. And that is where our alliance and our friendship has really been evolving, because we see the future and we know what's possible, but without it, everything's at risk. The whole industry's at risk, right? Because as soon as people start having bad experiences, and they're already happening, and mostly an unregulated product, that's where it puts us all, not in a good place. So I think the future is exciting, and I look forward to it. And I welcome people to come in and ask us questions in the Facebook group and to be a part of these conversations. And I am so grateful to have you here today and to have this conversation, and always for us to just, have our good talk. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This was great.
Good time.